welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're going to be making an adorable, kind of scrappy, quilt-like crossbody bag. Today, we are going to be making the Leenek bag, and this comes to us from Leenek Studios. Now, before I show you the bag, I just want to tell you the story of this. I'm so sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Please correct me. Leen sent me a letter, and Leen is from Estonia, and she mentioned that she's been starting to make bags. She came up with her own pattern. She sent me the link for it, asked if I'd take a look, if I was interested in doing a video. I loved it, bought the pattern right away, and now we're doing a video for it. So I want to show you this adorable bag. So this right here is my first version, and you guys know how much I am loving this solid color blocking. Now this isn't color blocking, this is more like Lego blocking, right? All of these different colors really give this bag like a Lego-like look. Now in the pattern, she actually uses two different colors for this look, which gives you like a stripe effect. I think you could have so much fun with this. You could arrange these in a way to create a shape. If you want to use like a quilt block, you could just do all strips, which I do want to make another one where each row is the same color. I think that would look so cool. But this is the front of the bag. On the back of the bag, we have a little recessed zip pocket. This pocket is completely optional. You do not have to add it if you don't feel like it. I love these types of pockets because this is where I put my phone. This is the part that goes against my body. I put my phone in that pocket. It's easy to access. I love these pockets. Now, on the top of the bag, we have a main zipper. We're going to open that up. And then on the inside, we have a slip pocket and a zip pocket. The slip pocket is optional. The zip pocket is not. That's how you're going to turn the whole bag out. I would say this is definitely a beginner-friendly bag. If you want to make sure it's very beginner-friendly, use like a quilt cotton. Use quilt cotton, piece your exterior, and then add your woven interfacing. If you want to add a little bit of fusible fleece, Decoville Light, you can go ahead and do that. If you're more comfortable working with vinyl, I do suggest using vinyl to build this quilt block. It's not something we do a whole lot. I mean, if we have a lot of really small pieces, we don't usually go for the vinyl, right? Because it does get a little hairy. But if you take your time, you can definitely do that. I mean, look, when we add it together, every time we piece these blocks together, we top stitch them. So that holds it nice and flat. That way you don't have to worry about your quilt block getting all willy-nilly. I will say though, like when you're building this, it does get a little willy-nilly with the vinyl, but once you're done, it all comes together so nice. I love this bag so much. It's adorable. So I'm gonna show you what this bag looks like on. So here's what this bag looks like on. I would wear it as a crossbody. Look how colorful this is. This strap is cool, isn't it? It's that webbing again. I love it. But you can see it's a very kind of basic shape, but with a not so basic design, which I love that. So thank you so much to Leenek Studios for reaching out to me and telling me about this pattern. I'm so excited to bring this to the channel. I'm so excited to see what other patterns you come out with. If you haven't checked them out already, go on Etsy. I will have the link below. Make sure you check out their Instagram. I believe they also have a video going over this bag, so I'm going to put all the links I have down in the description of this video. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, tips, tricks, anything at all, leave them down in the comment section. I will tell you, we are going to be doing something a little different with these connectors here. So when we attach these little side connectors here, we're doing them a little different. So pay attention to that, okay? It can get a little tricky, but follow along. You'll get through it. You'll be fine. All right, guys, let's get started. So the materials you're going to need depends on if you're making a quilt cotton version or if you're making like a faux leather vinyl version. I'm actually not doing either of those. I'm doing a nylon version. This is the nylon material. It's a medium weight material. It's not very lightweight, but it's not as thick as vinyl either, but it does have some stiffness to it. Think seat belts. It has a very seat belt-like feeling to it. So I'll be using this, and instead of 2 colors per the pattern, I'm going to use 3 colors. So really you're going to need about a yard of material total. On my first bag when I used a vinyl, I just used a whole bunch of scraps. So this can be very scrappy, or you can be more, deliberate with how you do it. So you're going to need your exterior material, anywhere between a half, a quarter, to a full yard, depending on how you're going to lay it out. And then for your lining, you're going to need a half a yard of material. I am using a water-resistant canvas. This is the very lightweight, kind of like waterproof, more water-resistant, but it's very lightweight, and it doesn't require any interfacing. So I'm not using any interfacing today, except for possibly a scrap of Decoville Light when I'm installing the tabs on the side of the bag for the D-ring connectors. So I might use this. We'll see. So here's the hardware for today. First, you're gonna have 3 zippers. I'm gonna use a number 5 zipper for all 3 of them, and I'm using zipper tape. You're gonna have a 13-inch, an 8-inch, and a 6-inch or longer for each one of those. I would suggest at least a yard of zipper tape to satisfy that. And then since I have zipper tape, I have 3 different zipper pulls here to go with it. I have 2 3/4-inch D-rings, and for my strap, I'm actually gonna use this webbing. I love webbing for straps. It's just quick, it's easy, it's durable, it looks nice, very little work. This webbing, though, is 1.5 inches wide, which means any hardware that's going to be directly attached to the webbing needs to be 1.5 inch wide, which is the swivel hooks and the slider. These 3 pieces need to be the same width as your strap. The D-rings do not, because we don't use the webbing for the D-rings. We're going to use fabric for that. And then I have a bag tag, and if you've noticed, this is another one of those fun little faux leather bag tags. This is actually a cork bag tag, but now there's color. I know. This is a big deal, guys. Colored bag tags. I'll have a link down below. This is from the Heartwood and Hide. All right, so here's all the other stuff. First, I have some very, very sticky 1/4-inch double-sided tape. This is used for leather. It is super, super sticky. You don't want to sew over it if you can avoid it, but it is very good at holding things in place. And then I have some wash-away double-sided tape, and this is great for zipper installations. You can sew over this one, and your needle's going to be fine. Then I have my Kimberbell tape. This is my favorite tape. You can stick everything in place. It doesn't leave any residue. You can sew over it, so I have my Kimberbell tape. Then I have my turning tool for poking out little corners, a 1-inch by 6-inch ruler as always, a lighter for finishing off those little tail ends of threads, marking tools. I always love to have a chalk marker, a vinyl marker with silver ink, and then an air erasing marker. I have my seam ripper stiletto combo here, as well as a stiletto that I keep next to the sewing machine, small pairs of scissors, just, you know, you need scissors. And then I have some rivets because I will be using rivets for the bag strap. You could use rivets on the main part of the bag. We might try that. We'll see. It's going to be a little difficult because the way we install the D-rings is different in this pattern. So we'll see about that. But to go with the rivets, I have my rivet press. If you're interested in more information on the rivet press and all the different dies and attachments that go with it, I have a whole video going over that. I'll have it listed down below. And of course, the most important item that I always forget to mention, a healthy supply of these little plastic clips. Okay, so this bag is pretty much made up of a giant quilt block. That's kind of what we're doing. We're piecing together a bunch of small pieces to make a bigger piece, which is a quilt block. How difficult this is going to depend on the material you're using. So let's talk about the pattern pieces. You're going to have pattern pieces A and B. There are a certain number you're going to need of each of these. Again, the pattern is written with 2 colors in mind. I'm using 3. It's hard to tell, but I am using 3 colors this time. But as you can see in this first version here, I used all the colors. So you can have a lot of fun with this, and I do encourage you to do that. But I already pieced together one to save time, but what I did is I just counted in the pattern how many A blocks do we need, how many B blocks do we need, and then I just divided based on how many colors I had. So you're going to need your A and B blocks to build the front and back panels. This is the front panel. The back panel is actually going to have a strip going right along the middle. That's 1 strip for zipper installation. So if you wanted to skip the exterior zipper, which is this zipper right here, you see we have a solid strip, and that's where we installed the zipper. If you did not want to include this zipper, you could just make 2 of the front panels, and then that would look amazing. For that back panel zipper installation, you're going to have pattern piece C, which is nice, long, thin strip. And then for the bottom, you're going to need 2 cuts of pattern piece D, and you can see you will box out the corners here. Just make sure you cut those out. They're little 1.5 inch squares. Pattern piece E is going to be your D-ring connectors. I'm using the waterproof canvas for this. I did use the vinyl on the first bag. The more thick your material, the harder this is going to be. But you do want to use durable material. So like I said, I might be adding some Decoville Light to this. We'll see once we get there. We'll talk about it. Pattern piece F is the adjustable crossbody strap. Since I'm using webbing, I don't have to cut any material for that. Pattern piece G is the zipper tab. This is actually just going to be one of the little box corners that you cut out of your exterior or your lining. Again, since my material is a little bit thicker for the exterior, I'm going to use the lining material for the zipper tab. Pattern piece H is for a tassel option, which I am skipping today. Pattern piece I, you're going to have 2 of these. These are the body lining pieces. Make note of this measurement because this will help you when you're building your exterior. Your exterior might be a little bit bigger than it needs to be because of all the piecing. So make sure you keep this measurement in mind so we can clean it up if we need to. Next, we have pattern piece J, which is a rectangle, and it is for the interior slip pocket. Pattern piece K, you're going to have 2 of these. These are for the lining interior zip pocket. You have 2 of these because we turn the whole bag out through that lining zip pocket. And then pattern piece L is the exterior zipper pocket. This is optional if you decided you're just gonna skip the outside zipper pocket. Okay, so let's talk about building this panel. As you can see, I already did the front panel. You're gonna do a lot of sewing, a lot of top stitching, it's gonna take a minute, okay? It's not a quick process to build a quilt block like that. The back panel is a little bit quicker since we have one strip just like this. I suggest that you take all your pieces and you lay them out exactly how you want it to be in the end, and then you take a picture of it, because as you go back and forth between the machine and back over here, things will get mixed around. For example, this block is actually messed up. This black piece over here is supposed to be whoop over here. I was trying to do a black stripe, a light blue stripe, a dark blue stripe, but I mixed it up because the colors are so similar. So just keep in mind that stuff. I'm leaving it because I'm fine with it. So let's build the back panel. Okay, the front panel's done. Let's talk about the back panel. You're gonna wanna start with a short edge. I don't know which one of these. Let's start with that one, and then this one, and then this one, and then we'll try this one, and then this one. And have some fun with this. If you have a very specific design, just make sure you cut your material to satisfy that design. All right, I could go back and forth with this all day, but I'm gonna leave it like this. So now what we wanna do is we wanna stitch all this together. So we're gonna kinda go row by row. I'm gonna do this as quickly as possible, but like I said, at this point, take a photo. I'm using my phone to film this tutorial, so I'm not gonna be able to take a photo of it, but I will just try to commit it to memory and yell if you see me putting it in the wrong order. I won't hear you. So what I do is I always start with the short pieces, so I'm just gonna clip all the short pieces together, right sides together along the shorter edge. Okay, so as you can see, I took the short pieces from each row and I clipped them to their adjacent longer piece, and now I'm gonna sew along the short edges here that I clipped at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I do backstitch at the beginning and the end of every single one of these. We're gonna be pulling on a lot of things here. It is very easy for this thread to start kind of unwinding and things to separate, and then it's just gonna be a lot more work for you to deal with later. So backstitch at the beginning and the end of each one of these. Okay, so at this point you can put these back and attach the longer sides to each strip and stitch those down, but it's going to be, depending on the material you're using, that can make it a little bit more difficult. So let me just tell you, if you're using quilt cotton, building this is going to be a lot easier. Okay, if you're using vinyl, cork, this nylon material, it's a little bit more challenging. Quilt cotton or water resistant canvas, those are gonna be the easiest to make this quilt block with. So what I'm gonna do to make it easier is I'm going to top stitch this now. So what you wanna do is on the back, you're going to open up the seam so that it's just completely spread open like that. Both pieces of material are not both going to one edge. They need to be opened, going to their own side, just like that. And if you can iron your material, go ahead and iron it to flatten it out. If you can't, you're gonna have to just work on it at the machine. But what we wanna do is open up the seam and then top stitch along each edge of that seam. I know, it's a lot of top stitching, but you're gonna wanna do that for each one of these. And we're gonna do that a lot. As you can see, we do it a lot. This is why I'm using a thread color that doesn't stand out a whole lot. It's a dark thread color so that you can't see it if my lines are a little wonky, which we all know they are. All right, who remembers where this all went? Because I do not, that's not where that went. I do not remember where all the pieces went. That might be right. We're gonna go with that. Like I said, it likes to change on its own. Whatever it becomes, we're calling it an artistic design. We're letting the quilt block for the bag decide what it wants to be on its own. That's what we're gonna say. So let's take the long strip that's left over for each row and just flip them right sides together wherever they go. This is why we lay it out, and clip along the shorter edges. All right, let's sew along these clipped edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once again, backstitch at the beginning and the end each time. Once you have these sewn together, now we're gonna go back to the sewing machine, spread open the seams just like you did before, and top stitch on both edges to get a really nice flat strip. right, once you have them all done, let's see. There's no way I got this right. Let's see. Okay, that looks about right. So now what we're gonna do, we built our rows. Now we have to build the whole block. So we're gonna combine the rows. So let's first start with the top 2 rows. Take them both right side up, just right side, and then lay them right sides together. They should be about the same length. I always find that my pieced row is a little bit longer than the other row. That's okay, we can clean it up later. Just get them lined up the best you can, and then clip along this top edge here. And now I'm gonna do the same thing with the 3rd and 4th rows, just laying those right sides together and clipping along the top edge. Okay, so now we're going to sew along both of these clipped edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and the end each time, and then I am going to go ahead and just press open the seams with my fingers and top stitch along both edges. This is challenging with stiffer material because these bulky seams right here really don't want to press open. So you do kind of have to go slowly, get your thumb underneath there, press it a little bit, don't get too close to the needle, stop sewing. Press a little bit, flatten it out, sew. Stop sewing, pick it up, press, flatten, sew. So top stitching these rows can be a little challenging, especially if you have thicker material. If you want to have both of the seams go to one direction, you can do that. My only suggestion for that would be is to pay attention each row where it's going and do the opposite on the other one. So if on the front panel you have all of the seams on the rows, the long rows, going down and you top stitch them down, on the back panel just make sure you top stitch them up. So that way that they're going in opposite directions, so when you put it together, you don't have this big bulk of seams. Instead, they can kind of nest one another and it'll be easier to sew the sides. So now I'm just gonna continue what I just did to finish building this block. I'm going to first attach the bottom row, stitch that, top stitch it, and then I'm going to attach the top section and the bottom section, stitch and top stitch. All right, I know that can be a bit of work depending on the material you're using. I know I need to iron that. I will iron that at some point. So now my suggestion is take the length of this middle strip here. So you have the length of this in the pattern. Take that length and you want the rest of the panel, front and back, to be the same width as that, okay? So you see how my pieces over here overextended? I want everything to be the same width as this right here. So the height can be a little bit longer than it needs to be, but just take the time now to get your ruler and a rotary cutter and just trim it down so that it's all the same width as this strip right here in the middle. Okay, once you get these as squared up as you can, make sure you have it in the direction you want. So now grab your pattern piece D, which are your bottom panels, and we're just going to attach those to the bottom of our pieced blocks. So just laying everything right side up like this, we're gonna take it and flip the pieces right sides together. Line up that edge and clip together. Now let's stitch along these bottom panels at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and the end, and then once again, spread open those seams and top stitch along the bottom and the top of these seams. All right, so now we have our front and back panels complete. It does take a little bit of work, but it is really fun. So now I'm gonna focus on the front panel while I put my tag on. Just like normal, we wanna find the midpoints. I'm gonna find the midpoints on the top and the bottom. I don't really think we need it on the bottom, but it never hurts to have them on the top and the bottom. So I'm just gonna fold it in half and pinch, and that will give me my midpoint, and I'll just trim it very tiny, tiny little triangle with my scissors. Do the same thing on the bottom. Now I'm gonna grab my bag tag, and I think I'm just gonna put it on the 3rd row and centered with the midpoint. And honestly, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Isn't that cute? Maybe I'll put it a little bit lower so it stands out more. Yeah, I think I'll put it just one lower. I'm gonna do it on the 4th row, centered. That way it pops. So I'm gonna grab a small cut of my double-sided tape, and then I'm just gonna put it on the back of my tag, remove the paper, and then center this just like that. All right, now I'm gonna go and just top stitch around all 4 edges at a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'll be honest, I kind of moved it on accident while I was top stitching it, and instead of stopping and adjusting, I was like, I'll power through, and now my tag is a little bit crooked. That's okay, I still like it. Flip it to the back. You can see I left the tails of the top thread and the bobbin thread nice and long, so I can just pull on these bobbin threads, and then I can grab something pointy and pull the top thread to the back, and then I just triple knot these threads on the back side, and it leaves a nice clean look on the front where my crooked tag is. Ay, ay, ay. One day, guys, one day I'll get it figured out. Okay, so the front panel is now all good to go. Let's work on the back panel. So now grab your zipper pull for the exterior pocket, and the lining panel L. And let's mark the midpoint along the top edge of L. Okay, so then mark a box that is 8 inches wide by 1/2 inch tall, and it's 1 inch down on the back side of your pattern piece L. I know that's a lot of information. It's all in the pattern though. But you're just gonna draw your little rectangle on the back of this pattern piece here at the very top. Make sure it's centered using that midpoint mark. And if you haven't already, make sure you mark the midpoint on the top and the bottom of your back panel. And then you're gonna measure 1 1/4 inch down from the top edge of the back panel. The back panel is right side up, your lining panel is right side down. And you're going to just lay it on top like that. Now, whenever you kind of push down in that rectangle that you marked with your finger, it should be running right along that strip. That's just one strip of fabric right there. This is where I like to use that Kimberbell tape just to hold it in place. Okay, now let's go to the sewing machine and just sew along this rectangle that you marked. Make sure your needle stops in the corner, and then you pivot your material. You're just tracing that 8 inch by 1/2 inch box. Once you have that stitched in place, you're gonna mark a midpoint line going along the length of it, and then just mark little triangles going from the corner down to those midpoint lines. And then use your seam ripper to rip along the line just enough so that you can get your scissor in there. Plop in your scissors and cut along that line until you get to the tip of those triangles, and then cut along the angled edges of the triangles till you get to the corner of your rectangle. You're trying to get really close to those threads without actually cutting the threads. Do this on both sides. Now, you're going to take your lining panel and flip it through that opening to the back side of your back panel. And depending on your material, you might be able to press this with an iron to get it to flatten out really nicely. I don't think mine's going to do that for me today. This is the first time that I'm messing with this nylon with like a pieced bag. I have made a bag where the nylon material was just one big piece, and that turned out really nice. But I don't think the nylon is meant for this type of like quilt block look. But it's only one way to find out, so we'll see how it looks in the end before we pass final judgment. All right, so I'm just giving it a good press from the front with my fingers. And then on the back, we can once again use some tape to try to hold it in place. That'll work. So now I'm gonna grab my zipper tape, and I don't usually measure this out. I'm just gonna make sure my zipper tape is about 1 inch longer on each side than the window. And then I'll grab my zipper pull and install that. Now I'm gonna grab my double-sided tape and apply that to the long edges of the zipper tape. Okay, so I'm gonna take my zipper, I'm gonna lay it right side up, and I like my zipper to close towards the left, so I have it going towards the left when closed. And I'm gonna take the paper off of the top strip of double-sided tape, and then I'll take my back panel here, and I'm just gonna lay it, and I'm gonna make sure I'm pretty much centering it over the zipper tape along the sides so it's not too close on either edge. And then I'm gonna center the zipper coils in there. And I just kind of lightly push it down on the top and close the zipper all the way, and that helps me get the coils nice and straight. And since the tape isn't super sticky, you can move things around if you need to. All right, once I'm happy with the top edge, I'm gonna lift up my back panel and my lining, and I'm going to remove the paper from the bottom part of the double-sided tape. And then I'll just flip the whole thing back down. And now I'm just gonna kind of tuck everything in, straighten it out, and push it down against that tape. The tape's not super strong, but it will hold it enough for you to sew it. Okay, once I'm happy with that, I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine and just top stitch along all 4 edges of this rectangle at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I do like to back stitch over the teeth each time, just because that gets the most use when you're opening and closing the zipper. Alrighty, there we go. So now we're gonna flip this over so we're looking at the back. If you have any tape here, you can remove it. You can trim down your zipper tape if you'd like. I usually just keep it long. It doesn't hurt anything. And then you're gonna take your lining panel and flip it right sides together so that the short edges come up to meet one another, and just clip them together along that top edge and the sides. And then just push it down on the sides to flatten it out real nice. And now you can flip it over so you look at the right side of the back panel. Flip it upside down. What you're going to do is you're going to lift up the back panel and sew along the edge and the top, and then around to the other edge, anywhere between 1/4 inch and 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, that back pocket is now done. We can set the back panel to the side. So now we're going to do pretty much the same thing with the lining zipper pockets. You're going to grab a pattern piece I, as well as both pattern piece Ks. And first thing you should do is mark the midpoint on the top and bottom of all 3 of these pieces. Honestly, you only need to mark the midpoint on the top of all 3 pieces. So on the back of one of your piece Ks, you're going to mark a 6 inch by 1/2 inch high rectangle that is centered and 1 inch down from the top edge of this piece on the back side. And then with your lining panel facing right side up, you're going to take that pocket piece, lay it right side down so that you see the rectangle on the back, and you're going to center it and put it down 2 inches from the top edge. And I'm just using tape once again to hold it in place. And now I'm just going to stitch right along that rectangle, just following the lines and making sure I pivot at each corner. Next, draw your midpoint line going along the long edges, and then draw the little triangles on the corners, just like we did on the back panel. And then use your seam ripper to rip through all the material to create a hole. And then take your scissors and cut along that middle line until you get to the tip of the triangles and trim down to the corners. Then push your lining pocket through the hole so that both of these pieces of material are wrong sides together. If you're using quilt cotton or even waterproof canvas, you can iron this. Just try to make sure your iron doesn't touch the back of the waterproof canvas. As long as it's only touching the front side of the material, so right here, you should be okay. But with water-resistant canvas, which is what I'm using, you can actually just give it a good press with your fingers, and it stays pretty well. It doesn't fight you too much, unlike a thicker waterproof canvas. There we go. So now I'm going to grab some zipper tape, and once again, I'm just going to kind of overlay this and cut it so that it's bigger than the hole. And then I'll grab my zipper pull and install the zipper pull. Now I'm going to add double-sided tape along both long edges of our zipper tape. And then once again, I'm going to lay my zipper right side up so that when the zipper is closed, it goes towards the left, and remove the paper from the top edge. Take my lining panel and just center it over my zipper tape. And I'm just pushing down the top edge since that's where the sticky stuff is. And then once I've got it down, I'm just going to close the zipper all the way to get it straight. Ooh, that's not straight. All right, once you're happy with that, you can flip up the lining and then remove the paper from the other tape, and then flip it back down and press it down. There we go. All right, so this pocket is not optional because this is how we turn the whole bag out, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So if you're not very comfortable with these pockets yet, I would say skip it on the exterior panel, but definitely do it on the lining. This is going to give you practice, and eventually this will be a little bit easier. So now we're going to top stitch along all 4 edges just around this rectangle at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Definitely back stitch over the zipper teeth on this part, like on these short edges, back stitch on each side, because we're going to be pushing everything through this hole in a little bit. Okay, so you might have noticed I have some like looping over here on the side. I'm having tension issues with my machine right now, to be honest, but I can fix it. So I left the tails long because again, I'm going to tie them on the back, but where I have the little looping in the stitching, I'm going to come to the back and try to find that area. And without cutting it, so I'm using a stiletto to gently pull the thread from those loops to the back. All right, once I have that done, then I'm just going to take my bobbin threads, pull on them, and I'm just tying all the threads in the back, trying to get this zipper to be as secure as possible. Now grab your remaining lining zipper pocket panel, flip your lining so you're looking at the back side, the back of the zipper. Take this panel and lay it right side down so that your two panels are right sides together, and then just clip together. If the panel you already attached is a little bit smaller than the panel you're adding now, because it does kind of shrink when you do this type of zipper, it sucks everything in and shrinks it a little bit, that's okay. Just do your best to get it all lined up mostly. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, what I'm gonna do is on this bottom edge here, I'm actually going to take it and I'm going to fold it up. I'm taking both lining panel edges and flipping them up to the wrong side, anywhere between 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 of an inch, whatever's easiest for you. I would say more than 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm just adding clips like this to hold it in place. And now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew along the side and the top and the other side at a 3/8 inch seam allowance or so. Backstitch really well at the beginning and the end. Do not sew along the bottom and keep it folded while you're sewing. We want to keep it folded. It's going to make it easier to tuck everything in the end, but you are going to leave this open for turning it out later. So backstitch well at the beginning and the end. There we go. This lining panel is done, so you can set it to the side. Now we're going to work on the slip pocket. So we have our remaining lining panel, the last one, and then pattern piece J. You're going to take your pattern piece J and you're going to fold it right sides together so that the short edges meet one another. And then just clip along all 3 raw edges. And before you go to sew this, mark yourself a little 3-inch opening on the longer edge. And now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch along the sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance and also along the long edge, but don't stitch between your opening marks. So I have my little 3-inch opening here. So I'm going to go along the side, up to that mark, stop, backstitch over the opening, and then continue along the long edge and then down the other side. And just make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end around the opening and also over here on the fold. All right, once you have that sewn, you can just gently cut the corners of your material. This will help it poke out a little bit better. And I'm going to grab my turning tool for this. And I'm going to flip everything out through that hole. So now the right side of the material will come out. Now I'm going to take my turning tool, put it in there and poke out the corners. There we go. And then let's press this with the iron. Since it's all right side, we can press it with the iron. Okay, so what you want to do is just kind of put your fingers in the hole and tuck down those raw edges nice and gently. And the goal here is to get this nice and straight. Is it going to be straight for me? Probably not, but that's okay. So I'm just going to take my iron and just press to flatten it out. I'm going to have the opening on the bottom, so my pocket will be more like this. So it's a lining pocket, it's a slip pocket. If it's not a perfect rectangle, I think you're gonna be fine. All right, so that looks, it's a little wonky, but that's okay. Okay, grab your main lining panel and find the midpoint on the top. And what I'm gonna do before we attach this is I'm going to top stitch along the top edge of the slip pocket. Now, the pattern has you use the opening edge as your top edge. I'm gonna use it as the bottom. So I'm gonna top stitch along the long edge that does not have the opening at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. And this is one of those cases where I use a lighter, because when I top stitch along this, we have these little, just like little tiny pigtails. You know, there's like little tiny pokes of thread off the edge right here, which is normal. But if you want to give it a professional look, you pull the material away so you just have the thread sticking out, and you just kind of boop it so that the thread sucks in on itself. And then you don't have those little pigtails. And it has a really professional look. Just want to be careful that you don't scorch your material, because then it turns it dark. It makes it black and sooty. Okay, so I used just a little pin to mark the center of the top of the pocket, and then I measured 2.5 inches down from the top edge and centered it, just like that. Now I'm going to grab that tape again and just tape down this pocket so it will stay in place before I get to the machine. So now I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to top stitch along the sides and the bottom at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance Make sure you top stitch at the beginning and the end, so up here around the top. And then also when you go along the bottom, just make sure you are closing that little hole that you left in your pocket. All right, there we go. The last lining panel is done. Now let's prepare the zipper. Okay, I got my zipper way too long. It needs to be 13 inches or longer. It's definitely or longer. This is more like 18 inches long, but that's fine. I'm gonna put on my zipper pull. There we go. And so whenever you put the zipper pull on, you see you have like a closed end. And so like this very end right here is the closed end. It will never open up. It should always be closed. This end over here though, as we open the zipper, you see this side opens. So before we open it entirely, let's measure down 1 inch from the raw edge and mark on the tape. There we go. Now we can open it up all the way. On the open side, leave the other side closed. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna pinch right at that mark so your zipper tape becomes wrong sides together and it naturally curves up into the side. So we're gonna let it do that. And you can see with this, because we used a 1 inch mark, we have a good amount of overhang over here. That little bit of overhang is gonna make it easier to stitch this in place at the machine in just a moment. So let's do the same thing on the other side. I'm gonna pinch the zipper tape wrong sides together at that mark so that the coils go up and to the left, fold over, and then add a clip to hold it together. There we go. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine, and I like to flip it like this, and we're gonna baste this in place. So we're gonna stitch at about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the edge of the zipper tape right at the end here to hold it all together. I find this easiest to do with a zipper foot, and it is easier having a little bit of extra overhang like we do right now. So when I get there and you remove the clip, it all comes undone. But I use my stiletto to just kind of hold it in place like that and guide it underneath the machine and stitching this down. So I'm gonna do this for both sides. Okay, once you have that stitched down, you can see when I try to pull my zipper all the way, it can't go past that, which is nice. So now we're gonna measure from this end over here that we just stitched, and we're gonna measure down 12.5 inches and then cut off the rest of the zipper tape. So this whole tape now needs to be 12.5 inches long. Now grab your zipper tab, which is pattern piece G, and with the zipper facing right side up, take your zipper tab and lay it right side down and just cover the raw edge over here that we did not sew and line up those edges. Your zipper tab should be wider than your zipper tape. That's fine. Just make sure it covers it completely. And now let's stitch along the short edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, now take that zipper tab and wrap it around the edge and then towards the back. And what you can do is you can wrap it nice and tight around there. So wrap it around nice and tight, and your zipper tab will overextend. If you want, you can fold your zipper tab under like this and then wrap it around so that you don't have any raw edges anywhere. That's just gonna depend on the material you're using. If you're using a vinyl or something like that, just leave the raw edges and trim it down. Since I have this material here and it's not too bulky, I can go ahead and just fold that raw edge under. There we go. So now we're gonna top stitch along the bottom edge here, closest to the zipper teeth, at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once you have that stitched on, now you can just trim down the zipper tab so it's the same width as the zipper. There you go, and then you can also trim down your little dog ears up here so that the zipper is just one width the whole way. All right, now we're gonna install the zipper on the main panel. So grab your front main panel, and you should already have a midpoint along the top edge of that one. Go ahead and mark a midpoint along both sides of your zipper as well. So I just fold that in half, and you can mark it with a marking tool, or you can cut a very tiny triangle. I know a lot of you guys prefer to use a marking tool on zipper tape, so we'll do that. So I'm just gonna use my silver marking pen here. So now I'm gonna take my main panel, my front panel, and lay it right side up. Then I'm gonna take my zipper, and when the zipper is closed, so you can see the whole zipper's closed and the zipper pulls on the left, I'm gonna have it just like that and lay it right side down, matching up the midpoints. And then let's clip these together. Okay, now let's baste this on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So once you have that basted on, lay your exterior front panel right side up, and then grab your lining panel that has the slip pocket on it and lay that right side down and match it up with the top edge of the exterior front panel, and then just clip these together. Okay, now I'm gonna sew along this top edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have those stitched together, let's flip these panels so that they are wrong sides together. And if you are using material that you can iron, that's going to be the best way to make sure this gets nice and straight Otherwise, you're just gonna have to finger press this. So just make sure everything lines up. So get that zipper as straight as you can. And I'm just finger pressing this. And now we're going to top stitch along the top edge here, but only where there's zipper tape. So you're not going to top stitch all the way to the edges. You're just going to top stitch where the zipper is. So I do back stitch at the beginning and the end of each part of this. All right, it's looking pretty cool. I think it's looking pretty cool. I was a little nervous about this material for this type of bag, but I think it's looking good. So now grab your exterior back panel and lay that right side up, and then take your unit and lay it right side down. So we are working on the opposite edge of our zipper tape now. Line up the midpoint on your zipper tape with the midpoint on the exterior back panel. Clip those together and then clip along this entire top edge here. All right, now we're going to baste along this top clipped edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have that basted on, lay your unit so that the zipper is wrong side up. Take your last lining panel and lay that right side down and line up the top edge. All right, now I'm going to sew along this top edge at 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once again, let's flip the lining and the exterior wrong sides together. And since I can't iron this really, I like to clip along the sides to hold it all together and then just finger press from the front and from the back, just to make sure nothing funny's going on. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the back panel only where the zipper is at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I am going to backstitch the beginning and the end, and again, we're not going all the way to the edge, only where the zipper tape is. All right, once you have that all stitched in place, you can set this to the side. I mean, I think it's looking cool. Now you're going to grab your 2 D-ring connectors and lay them wrong side up. You can see I adhered very small scrap pieces of Decovil Light to the back of them. I think this is going to help make them a little bit more durable. It might make it a little bit more difficult to stitch them in place, but I'm also considering adding some to the sides of the exterior. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But for right now, if you want to add some firmer interfacing to your more lightweight material for the D-rings, you can go ahead and do that. What we want to do now is just draw a midpoint line going down the back of each one of these. And then you're going to fold the long edges wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line. There we go. And depending on your material, you might want to iron this. I think I am going to iron this. If you're using vinyl for this, I do suggest you go and you top stitch down along the long folded edges. That's what I did on my vinyl one, because it will be very hard to keep this folded in without top stitching it. So I top stitched down along the long edges at about 1/4 inch seam allowance. So then when I stitched it onto the bag, I used 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. But with this water resistant canvas, I think we can just iron it and it will stay put. So we're going to try that. Okay, so I'm just going to lay this down. I'm going to heat it up with the iron. No steam, nothing like that. But after you heat it up, just kind of press it with your fingers. And the water resistant canvas becomes like a paper, like it stays like that. It's not going to fight you anymore. So do this for both of your D-rings. Once you have these pressed, grab your D-rings and some double-sided tape. And what we want to do is we're going to thread the strap connector over the bottom straight edge of your D-ring and fold them on the back side. So we're not pulling the short edges together like that. We're folding them together so that the short raw edges are hidden on the back. All right, and this is a little tricky since we didn't top stitch. I'm just going to tell you, it is easier if you top stitch those edges first. But I'm going to grab a piece of the double-sided tape and I'm going to cover the back edge here where the raw edges are showing. I'm going to cover this with the double-sided tape and that will help hold it together. All right, just like that. So I'm going to repeat that with the other D-ring. Okay, so this is how the D-ring connectors look on the front, nice and smooth, and on the back, their raw edges are back there and we have the double-sided tape. Now this next part gets a little tricky. So take your bag and we're going to pull the exterior panels right sides together, lining panels away from that. And we're going to work on one side at a time. So first we're going to work on the side with the zipper tab because that's the most difficult side. So here's the side over here with the zipper tab. We're going to line up our exterior materials, and you can line up the seam as well up here where they connect, and I like to push all the material, both sides of the seam, down towards the exterior. So we're just gonna line this up and clip together along this edge where the zipper tab is. And I am trying to line up my blocks. So the seams for all my rows, I am trying to kind of line those up so that they wrap around the bag nicely. Okay, and right now we're only worried about the top 3 inches. So if you want to measure 3 inches down from the seam and make yourself a mark, go ahead and do that. So it's just below one of these connectors here. And now, again, we're only working on right here. Don't touch the other side yet. We're going to start up here where the lining and the exterior connect, and we're going to sew down to that marked line at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. I'll be honest, I was accidentally sewing at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is fine. My bag will just be a tiny bit smaller. I just need to remember that, so whenever I sew the other sides, I'm going to keep sewing at a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the sides. So little mistakes like that are fine if they occur. So now what we want to do, this is tricky. You're going to open up your top zipper all the way so you can do this, okay? And you want to spread open the seam that you just sewed. If you can iron it, go ahead and do that. And this is where, on the front side, the other side, we're going to stitch this in place. So if you wanted to add a little bit more stabilizer, a small cut of Decoville Light or something like that, now's the time to do it. You're going to just kind of plop it over there. You can glue it on, you can heat it on. I'm not going to because I think my material is firm enough, hopefully. So let's flip this over so we're looking at the right side. Do your best to press out those seams. I know, this part is tricky. It is tricky. You have a big zipper pull, try to get it out of the way. Now, you want to measure down 1/2 inch from the top edge. So you might actually want to just pop out this corner real quick so you have a better view of everything. There we go. So I'm just going to kind of pop this out. I'll tuck it back in a minute, but I'm going to measure 1/2 inch down and just within a chalk marker, I'm just going to mark 1/2 inch down. There we go. So now I know where I need to be. So let's flip this back out so that the lining is separated from the exterior. I know, this is tricky. I feel like there are other options here, but we're going to do it this way. Okay, now we're going to take one of our connectors and remove the tape from the back, or the paper from the tape, and we're going to tape this on, and it's going to cover the seam, that little bit of seam we have right there. It's going to center over the seam, and the top edge, where the D-ring is going to meet up with that 1/2 inch mark. Okay, do your best to get it centered, make sure all the raw edges are tucked in. I know it's tricky, guys, I know. So now we're going to top stitch around, holding this in place. We're going to do right underneath the straight bar of the D-ring and then 1/8 inch on the side and the bottom, and then we're also going to stitch an X through that little rectangle that we're making for extra security. If you want to put rivets here, you can also do rivets. I'm just going to stitch today. Alrighty, I probably should have used a thread color that was the same color as my material, because that's some mix, but it's okay, it's on there. Like I said, if you wanted to use rivets instead, you can. This is a very tricky way to add something like that. But now pretty much what we want to do is we're going to repeat that with the other side. So take your exteriors and flip them right sides together again. And this time we're going to line up the sides for the open end. And then once again, mark 3 inches down from the seam. And then I'm going to stitch from that 3 inch mark up over the seam right here, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And since I made the mistake of doing 1/2 inch on the other side, I'm going to once again do 1/2 inch on this side. Okay, so a little bit trickier this time. Once again, try to spread out that seam as best you can. And then let's flip to the front. Oh, I didn't line up right, did it? So we can mark 1/2 inch down from the top edge. Okay, so I'm going to actually pull the lining through the opening on the top here. just like that. The hardest thing here is figuring out how to get this flattened out so that you can stitch on it. So what you want to do is kind of get everything else mushed out of the way. And you end up with like a little bowl situation. And try to flatten out the back seam. There we go. Now let's take the remaining D-ring connector and we're going to tape this on. Make sure the D-ring is up towards the zipper. And just center it over that seam. All right, now it's hard to see, but once again, we're going to take this to sewing machine and we're going to stitch underneath the bar around an 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to do an X to hold it in place. All right, there we go. The D-rings are attached. They're attached. We'll reserve judgment for when it's all done. Okay, so now we can just finish the bag as normal. So clip all the sides together. So start with the exterior, clip the remaining of the exterior sides together and the bottom together. Okay, before we get started, make sure that this pocket right here for the lining is open. So open that zipper in that lining zip pocket. And also make sure the zipper is open for the main body of the bag. There we go. So on the exterior portion, I'm going to continue sewing at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's again, just because I messed up over here, but 1/2 inch on the sides, and then I'm gonna sew at a 1/2 inch on the bottom. On the lining side, because again, I need this to be a little bit bigger, I'm gonna sew at a 5/8 inch seam allowance along the sides and also along the bottom. Make sure you backstitch really well everywhere. So over here where you're connecting with the stitching you already did, backstitch there. Backstitch around these box corners. You're not gonna stitch around them like that. You're gonna stop once you run off the edge, but backstitch and then backstitch the bottom. All right, once you have the bottom and the sides all stitched, now we just have to box the corners. So go ahead and kind of pull the material away from one another so that you can get these corners nice and boxed. That might be a little bit difficult to see. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring the two seams right sides together, and then I just fold them in opposite directions so they like give themselves a little hug. I don't open the seams or anything. And then we're just gonna clip to get this nice little bit right here, nice and flat. So you're gonna do this for all 4 box corners. Okay, so on the exterior side, I'm going to box these corners by stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. On the lining side, I'm gonna stitch them at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. If you're using really thick exterior material, you might want to do 2 rows of stitching here to make sure that those corners don't get pulled on when you press it right side out. Once you have those boxed, if you have any seams that are just really long, like since I changed my seam allowance, some of these seams are super long, so I'm just going to trim them down just a little bit, mostly just on the box corners. I'm probably not going to trim down the sides. There we go. Now we're going to turn the whole bag through that opening in the zip pocket in our lining. So just go slow while you do this. Once you got it turned out, pop out those corners of the exterior, and then you can push in your lining, and then wherever you have your zipper tab, you're just going to reach into the main part of your bag, not between the layers, but just into the main part, and just get your finger underneath there and pop up that zipper tab. So now, I mean, I gotta be honest, this looks really cool. I think it turned out, I love the material. Now, the material was a little difficult to work with, but I think in the end, this turned out looking really cool. All right, let's finish it up. So take the lining out of the zip pocket inside. Just pull it all the way out like that. And then if you just kind of roll the edges where the seams are and put your fingers in there and give it a tug, the raw edges will kind of fold down in on themselves. So once you do that, get those raw edges folded in, grab some clips, clip along this edge. We're just holding the fold. So now I'm going to grab one of these little woven tabs here, which are just cute, and I'm going to insert this into that opening that we're working on so it sticks out. The raw edges go inside, the folded edge goes outside, it sticks out a little bit. It's just a fun accent, and I'm going to stitch that in. So now I'm going to sew along this entire folded edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Alrighty, now we can just tuck in that pocket into the zipper. Alright, now let's close that zip pocket and then just push out everything inside the bag to get it nice and flat. Alright, that looks cute. Zip it up. I think that turned out lovely. You know, it's not my color palette, but I think it still works. Okay, let's build the strap real quick. So when I use webbing for bag straps, I like to cut it down to 52 inches long. I'm gonna grab our hardware, our rivets, bag can go to the side, and your webbing. If you're using webbing, you do want to grab a lighter and melt the raw short edges so that it doesn't fray. There we go. Now I'm going to grab my slider and I'm laying it facing up. I'm going to take my webbing from the bottom on the left and put one end over that middle bar and wrap it around. And then I take my webbing and I fold it under by about 3/4 of an inch and then fold it over. So that way I don't have the raw edges showing anywhere. And you want to fold it over enough so if you're using rivets to attach this, the rivet will grab all of it. You don't want the rivet to just grab the very edge of the raw edge and then it frays. So now I'm just going to mark placement for 2 rivets. And there are templates you can use for this, or just use your eyeballs. Once I have those marked, I'm going to use my hole punch to punch through those 2 marks. And then I can grab my rivets and just pop them through those holes. There we go. And I'm going to leave those there. I'll set them at the end. So now I'm going to take my strap and I'm going to lay it so that the folded edge is facing up like this. And keeping everything straight, I'm going to grab one of my swivel hooks and just slide it on so that the swivel goes down like that. See? All the way over. And then I'll take the raw edge, put it up through the side that has the fold over here, over the middle bar, and out the other end. So now I have the raw edge on one side, my slider in the center, it looks nice, and then my swivel over here on the edge facing outwards. See? Then I'll take my remaining swivel hook, insert it so that the swivel is up on the same side as the slider, and then once again I will fold the raw edge over by about 3/4 of an inch and then fold it over again, wrapping it around the straight part of that swivel hook. I'm going to use some clips here to hold it together on the sides, and then I'm going to use a marking tool to mark placement for my rivets, making sure I catch all the edges. And then I'll use my hole punch to punch out those holes. All right, once those holes are punched, I like to quickly put the rivets in. I mean, nothing's gonna go anywhere, but now I'm gonna grab my rivet press and I'm just gonna set all these rivets. All right, there you go. And I like using rivets for bag straps because, like you can tell here, I'm not the best at stitching an X on things, so it just ends up looking a little bit neater and they're very durable. So once you have that all done, just clip this onto your bag, and there you go. That is a cool bag. All right, guys, I'm gonna be honest with you. It has been some time since I finished making that bag and today. And in that time, between finishing this bag and this very moment, I've actually taken this bag right here and I've taken it on a cruise. I took it on a Disney cruise and I took it over to Disney's private island, Castaway Cay. And I got it dirty. I put it in the sand. It got ocean water on it. It got a little bit of margarita on it. It was used as a bag would be used on a private island when on your dream cruise, right? And it looks fantastic. So this material I am a huge fan of. Is it the easiest to work with for a beginner for this particular bag? No, okay? It does have some density to it. It is going to take some patience and some time to work with it in this type of setting here, okay? With these like small cuts, this quilt block setting. But it is a great everyday bag, especially if you're traveling or you have kids or you're like me and you're just kind of a clumsy, messy person naturally. But let's just spend one more moment looking at this beautiful, beautiful bag. Can we just talk about that tag too? These colorful bag tags are so fun, so exciting. I cannot wait till you guys get your hands on them. I can't wait to see what you do with them. Make sure you reach out to Jade. She's gonna have so many options too that are already pre-made. So if you don't have a logo, you don't have a business, you don't have to have a business to put these types of tags on your bags. Jade's gonna offer a lot of really fun, pre-made, ready to go ones that you can just put on your bag, make it custom. So pretty. And then, you know what? My top stitching isn't terrible on these X's. I mean, I've done worse, okay? I've done worse. I could still slide my rivet press in here and add a rivet if I wanted to, so definitely consider doing that. However, one of the things I was testing, besides the material when I took this on my trip, I was also testing the durability of that because I am a big fan of rivets, you know that. And there's no rivets on these D-rings, and I just used the waterproof canvas with a little bit of interfacing in there, and it held up great. Because you guys, I shoved everything in this bag. I was like everybody's swim stuff, goggles. It was busting at the seams, all right? And it was fine. It was fine. It's a great, great, great bag. So if you haven't tried this material, I highly suggest you give it a try, especially if you're used to working with vinyl. If you haven't made this bag, please do. And if you make this bag and you post it on social media, please make sure you tag me. I really want to see it. Tag Lean as well. We want to see your versions. I am so excited about this pattern. I know it's kind of like it's a basic shape, right? It's a boxed bag. It is very simple and great for beginners, but with this like quilt design, you can have so much fun with it. Like I said, I want to make like a rainbow row. Every row a different color. Bright, beautiful, perfect for June. I'm very excited about that. So thank you as always for sewing with me today. I hope you had a good time. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye guys.